do invoicing, how to do reporting, introduce you to staff. So if you are a, ongoing grantee, a lot of this will be review for you, but we appreciate your coming. So go to the next slide. So this is going to be our agenda. As I mentioned, we're going to introduce staff. We're going to give you an overview of the Community Development Fund. There's different funding sources, and that actually matters to you because your reporting may be different depending on what your funding source is for your grant. We'll talk about agreements, which are hopefully almost done for many of you, reporting and invoicing, and we have a representative here from Zoom Grants, our grants management system, to give a demo, which I think will be helpful. So you can ask her questions that you may have about that. We'll talk about if you need to change budget or performance measures during the year, and then we'll give you some important dates. So let's do introductions. First, my name is Jennifer Daniels, and I manage the Community Development Fund program. Staff that's important for you to know: Zina Abdul Rahman is our administrative grant specialist, and probably many of you have been working with her on your agreements. So she handles a lot of our agreements, works with our lawyers on that. Andrew Hartzig is our management and budget analyst. Hi, Andrew. You'll be hearing from him later. So he's the person who approves your invoices. And also Marie Randall, who is also on the finance team, is here. She's our finance manager, and I think she's here. Yeah, I see that you are. We'll also be talking a little bit later. And then the two people who are really important are Caitlin Jones and Roldan Ned. They are each assigned as project monitors for your projects. So they'll be your first point of contact if you have questions about your grant, about reporting, about changing performance measures. So if you don't know who your monitor is, let us know and we can let you know. So I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin Jones, who's going to kind of walk through the Community Development Fund agreements and income and things like that. So good morning, Caitlin.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of our subrecipient agreements and some of the reporting requirements. As Jennifer mentioned, they differ a little bit based on the funding source that you are awarded for fiscal year 2023. So just a quick overview, our agreements need to be with your organizations need to be in place before grant funds can be spent, which is why we've been working with all of you to try to get your program evaluation forms and budgets solidified and your grant agreement signed before July 1st, so that once July 1st hits, you can start operating your programs and you'll be able to bill us for any of the activities that you're working under your grant. So you should have been working with Zina to route your agreements through DocuSign to the authorized signers. If none of this sounds familiar, then make sure that you get in touch with either Rolda or I, and we can figure out how to get your agreement quickly routed through the system. So just another quick thing to note that the executed version of your grant agreement will be emailed to the staff that's listed in Zoom Grants, but if you do need a hard copy mailed to you, just let us know. We can arrange that. So let's go into the next slide. So quick overview of the Community Development Fund, and this should be familiar to a lot of you, but just wanted to make sure for some of our newer grantees that we go over this really quickly. It's made up of 4 different funding sources: the Community Development Block Grant, which is a HUD program; Community Services Block Grant, which is a HHS program that's administered through the state of Virginia; Community Services Block Grant Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, which is a state program; and then our Affordable Housing Investment Fund Housing Services grants, which is a local program. We also, through this Community Development Fund, we also administer some general funded programs, but there's only, I think, one of them. So if that's you, you know who you are. So move on to the next slide. So just quick reminder, recap, make sure you know which source is funding your program, because as I mentioned before, this is going to dictate what reporting requirements you're going to have for this upcoming fiscal year. So just some quick terminology before we get into reporting requirements. You'll hear me referring to organizations as subrecipients or subgrantees, and this is just because Arlington is the recipient of the federal or state funds. The organizations that are then sub-awarded those funds we call them subrecipients. A PE form is a program evaluation form, and it's the reporting portion of the subrecipient agreement that includes the strategies for how you're going to undertake your program, as well as the performance measures and indicators, demographic, and leveraging data that you're going to be required to submit to us quarterly. The consolidated plan or annual plan, these are planning documents that are required by HUD that outlines our strategies and programs and resources that we're proposing to be able to carry out the use of our federal funds. And then our CAPER is the Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report, which is the annual report that we submit to HUD to let them know how we did over the last year with our grant funds. So the first funding source is the Community Development Block Grant. As I mentioned, this is a HUD program. CDBG programs must comply with Title 24 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 570. And through these programs, if you're funded through CDBG, you can serve clients up to 80% of area median income. There are some other additional requirements that are part of this. So environmental review, Section 504, fair housing, Minority and Women Business Enterprises, Equal Employment Opportunities Act. A lot of these requirements, your organizations, because you're a nonprofit, you're automatically complying with them. Some of them go a little bit further than what you're already doing. And if you do need to do something additional to comply with one of these acts, we will let you know. So you don't need to do anything to figure out how to comply with this. If there's something that you need to be doing, we'll communicate that to you. So next slide. So AHIF, Affordable Housing Investment Fund, Housing Services. Again, this is a local funding source. So we take a portion of our county loan fund, the Affordable Housing Investment Fund, which generally supports bricks and mortar development projects. And we take a portion of that to allocate funding to housing services programs each year. So these are non-renewable grants that are awarded over 2 years. So if you are awarded an AHIF grant this year, that means you're automatically awarded an AHIF grant for next year for the same amount. You don't need to reapply for that second year, but you will need to update your budgets and performance measures next year. So again, you should know this because it was indicated in your grant agreement, but if you have any questions and if you think you were awarded an AHIF fund and you aren't really sure what year you're in, just reach out to us and we can work that out with you. So in terms of reporting for the CDBG and AHIF funded programs, this is just a snapshot of what was included in your program evaluation form that's attached to your grant agreement. So these are race and ethnicity categories that are dictated by HUD. And so we use the same reporting requirements for AHIF that we do for CDBG. So you'll be required to submit this information to us quarterly. So it's both the number of persons you're serving for both their race and ethnicity as well as their income. And just so we're going to go over this in a little bit when we do our Zoom grants demo, but just keep in mind that when you're submitting your quarterly reports, the total number of people that you're reporting in both your race and ethnicity table and your income table have to match. So let's go into the next slide. So the next funding source is the Community Services Block Grant Program. So it's passed through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and it's administered through the Virginia Department of Social Services. And CSBG programs must comply with Title 45 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 96. And if you are funded through the CSBG program, your program can serve clients up to 150% of the federal poverty level. Next slide. And then TANF, the next program is the CSBG TANF program. And these are funds that are allocated biannually through the Virginia General Assembly, and requirements are through the Virginia State Code. And programs that are funded through TANF can serve clients up to 200% of the federal poverty level. There are some additional TANF specific requirements, such as families must include families that are supported through this program must include a minor child less than 18 years old who resides with the family. Services or payments cannot be considered assistance as defined by the TANF grant, and costs that are incurred through the program must relate to one or more of the following. Have to include a work subsidy, education and training, childcare, transportation, and non-recurrent short-term benefits, which cannot exceed beyond 4 months. So just giving you a sort of quick overview of what that is. Generally, if you were awarded a TANF grant, when we were figuring out the funding sources for each of the programs, we went through all the programs and figured out which ones could meet these requirements. So if you weren't awarded TANF, then you don't really need to worry about this. So next slide. So this is the screenshot of what the TANF reporting table that looks like from the performance evaluation form that was attached to your grant agreement if you were awarded CSBG or CSBG TANF funds. So it's a little bit more extensive data that's required through the CSBG program, but it includes things like the gender, the age, the ethnicity, the family type, family size. If you go to the next slide, Jennifer, race, education level, and then some other characteristics. So this is going to look a little bit different, as I mentioned, in Zoom grants, just because of the way that the Zoom grant system works, but you'll see how that's translated once we get into the Zoom grant demo a little bit. So finally, for my part, these are the 2022 income limits for the next, so this will be in place through quarters 1, 2, and 3 of fiscal year 2023. These usually are updated in April. So next April, we'll send out the new 2023 income limits. But for now, these are the income limits that you should be using when filling out your income table in your reporting. This is also included in Zoom grants. So there's an income table tab when you get into Zoom grants that shows you the same table. So you should be able to reference that when submitting your reports. So I think now I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, unless there are any more slides for me. Oh, yeah. Okay. Handing it over to Andrew now.
Good morning, everybody, and good to see a lot of you again and meet new faces. Hope you're staying cool and dry during this hot, wet summer. So I'm just going to talk about what the county requires both from us and from our auditors when you send in your invoices to receive payment. So again, this is required by our finance office. We like to get everything up front. We can't process invoices until we have all these items I'm going to touch on. And then when we get audited, it's usually for a couple of years after the fiscal year in question. And so if we have everything from you all up front, that saves you all a lot of angst of trying to find files that are 2 years old. So when you submit your invoice into Zoom grants, we are looking for an invoice letter and supporting documentation of some kind. On your invoice letter, we are looking for the following things: a purchase order number. We are, like Caitlin said, we are going through, we're getting things signed by our county attorney's office, through our finance department, the actual agreement with you all. Once that's signed, we go into our system, we put everything in to set up a purchase order, and that generates a number. You will be getting your purchase order number from Xena, and they are specific to a program or a grant. So if there's anybody out there that has multiple programs or multiple grants, there's a purchase order per grant or program. We ask that you put that number that ties to your program or grant that you're submitting the invoice for. We are also looking for an invoice number on your invoice letter. Make up a number. The only thing we ask is that it not be a date. So your invoice number, for example, can't be June 29th, 2022, but you can do invoice number 1. I think there's a lot of systems out there that generate an invoice number. If you don't have a system, it's really okay to do invoice 1. If we ever have questions on an invoice, it's much easier for us to communicate with you all on which invoice we have questions for. We also need backup documentation or supporting documentation to accompany your invoice. And this backup documentation needs to tie out to every dollar on your invoice that you're requesting, except for indirect costs. And I believe that your agreement with the county will have your indirect cost rate. We do not need backup documentation on that indirect cost. For everything else, we do. Next slide, please. So here is just a sample cover letter. I've highlighted what's important. This is a couple years old. I pictured my son writing this, but now there's two of them. So there's a date that I highlighted, a purchase order number highlighted. You don't have to highlight it on your end. We can do it on ours. Here's an invoice number, the amount you're requesting, the program that you're requesting the amount for, and what's really helpful is a time period. Because that helps us go through supporting documentation. If you're asking for Q1 and if you have timesheets or receipts that fall into that quarter, fantastic. It's easy for us to read. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to go over some of the backup supporting documentation that we need or look for. So I know that a bulk of your grants go to personnel or admin. So as such, we need to make sure we get some really good supporting documentation for those amounts. So just some examples of the personnel documentation that would be helpful for us. Timesheets with the salary that's paid with our grant with a dollar amount paid. I know that you all have vastly different payroll systems. Some are pretty fancy, look really cool. Some of you use Excel spreadsheets. Totally fine. We're not going to make you go out and get a new payroll system just for this. If you do timesheets and you just have hours there, make sure that we have the rate on which your employees are paid. Some of your agreements have that rate. If not, please just include a note under invoice or on that spreadsheet. Employee number one makes 25 bucks an hour. They worked 300 hours in Q1. So whatever that math is. Again, different systems produce different things. If you have questions on that, please let me or your project manager know. Pay stubs are also really helpful if your system allows it to be pulled, or any sort of payroll records. I do, however, want to stress and emphasize that benefits are not an indirect cost. This is something we've looked into and checked into. Benefits are not an indirect cost. So if you are using your grant to pay for benefits, we need to be able to tie that back to your supporting documentation as well. So unfortunately, that means if you have a Excel spreadsheet system with your hours and salaries and you're requesting benefit, I don't know how sophisticated your spreadsheets might be, but if you're able to put in benefits there, if it's a rate, we know what FICA is. I think it's 7.65%. That's easy math to do. But if you're doing health insurance or retirement, what have you, please let us know rates or percentages or something, just so that we have that on our files to not only make sure it's an eligible cost for your grant, but also that we are complying with the requirements from the federal government, state government, and then within our own local government. So I think that's it on personnel. Your non-personnel, please send things like receipts or invoices if you contract some of your work out, or some sort of proof of payment on that, just like you would if you're submitting a reimbursement through your employer. Having a line item and within your receipt, I think it's a line item or a detailed receipt, is very, very helpful. It doesn't help too much to get an invoice or a receipt that just says spent $300 at store A. We don't know what that $300 was for. We don't know if it's eligible cost or an eligible expense. If you could just scan, if you have that, that's all the vendor has given you, put it on a piece of paper, write a note on that piece of paper, scan it in. If we do all this work up front, there's less questions back and forth between us and you all, and we could process your payments in a very quick manner and get you your money. Another thing that I wanted to add, and this is something again that's come from our finance department, general ledgers typically don't work for backup documentation unless it's very clear within your ledger what the expense was. Again, we need to make sure it's an eligible cost. It doesn't help just to show credit $500. We didn't know what that credit is. I have seen some general ledgers that are very detailed, and then tie back to detailed invoice cost list. Those are fantastic, those work, but just simply a general ledger without any detail and explanation unfortunately will not fly with our finance department. But if you have any questions, there's my email. Your project manager will have my email. I think all of you I've been in touch with before. And I also wanted to stress and emphasize that if you submit an invoice into Zoom Grants and the amount you're requesting, if that's higher than your backup documentation to include indirect cost, your invoice will be seen as incomplete and we will not be able to process payment. On the other side of that, if you submit an invoice for, let's say, $5,000 and your backup documentation is for $1,520 just because you have so many other receipts for other programs, totally fine. But if you have an invoice for $5,000 and we only see $3,000 worth of backup documentation, we will not be able to process that payment. So I just want to go over a couple examples on the next slide. I don't know how easy it is to see on your screen, but this is just an earnings record from somebody. It has hours, it has how much they were paid, and all of their benefits on there too. This is super easy to read, super easy to understand. On my screen, it's super tiny, so I don't see dates, but that's okay. That's not a deal. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, that has dates. That lets us make sure that we are paying for the right quarter that you're invoicing for. Next slide, please. And here we are with just another example. Very clear with the dates, very clear with how much was paid and all the benefits, etc. So these, I assume, come from systems that are very sophisticated, probably aren't cheap. If you have an Excel spreadsheet form, cool, not a problem. Next slide. So invoices can be submitted with your reports or separately, but they will not be approved until your reports are up to date. The exception being with your fourth quarter report, as I'm sure a lot of you know that you submitted a lot of it. Thank you for submitting invoices for folks with FY22 grants. We will be asking for your FY23 quarter 4 invoice by mid-June 2023. The reason for that is we have a very tight turnaround within the county to get things tied out and reconciled with our state and federal funding partners and internally with our closeout process. We have to get that stuff done, and the quicker we get the invoices from you all, the quicker we can get that done. And reports and invoices need to be submitted in Zoom Grants. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Marie Randall, who's going to talk about invoicing for cost incurred. Oh, there's a question. I'm happy to answer the question for you talk, Marie. Jennifer?
Good morning. My computer totally shut off, so if I'm asking a question where information was covered, I totally apologize. However, in reference to submitting documentation for reimbursement, is this monthly? Because I was just wondering, if it is monthly, is it a certain due date? For instance, one of my current grants, we have to submit it monthly and it has to be submitted by like the 15th. So the question is like, is this something that you would like for us to do monthly by a certain date and then also have the documentation that you requested?
Sure. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, Caitlin Rolda, that the agreements for FY23 have specific sort of blocks of when to invoice. And all your invoices need to come with backup documentation. I would say that no, we do not need monthly invoices. Please don't do monthly invoices. That's a lot of work on our end, and I'm sure it's a lot of work on your end, but it's a lot of work on our end too. You don't have to do monthly. Caitlin, I see you're unmuted. Feel free to hop in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think for our 2023 agreements, it doesn't specify an invoicing schedule, but we are requesting in 2023 that you submit at least one invoice by December 31st of this year. So if you want to just invoice twice, once at the end of quarter 2 and once, right at the end of quarter 4, that's fine. Or if you want to invoice quarterly, most organizations invoice quarterly. But we are requesting that this year you submit at least one by the end of the calendar year.
And if I may add, the question on the timing, that is only for the quarterly reports. So we ask that you submit your quarterly reports by the 15th of the month following the end of the quarter.
And Jennifer, I think that was a good segue into, unless there's another question, that's a good segue into Marie's next slide on invoicing for costs incurred.
Okay, this is my last question, and it
Okay.
may be answered in the next slides.
Yeah.
So in reference to receiving funding, do we receive funding like in the beginning, like at once? Or do we receive funding quarterly, or do we receive funding like twice a year? Because again, I'm just trying to make sure that I have an understanding compared to the other grants that I currently have as well.
Sure. So your funding comes from the county when we get the invoice. So we don't upfront any of the funding. We don't disperse it quarterly. You will not receive payment from us until you get us an invoice and we do our review. And just for you all's knowledge, if you submit one, it depends on when it gets into our system. The county pays out all invoices on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. So if you submit something Thursday at 10, you're not going to get it at the earliest until the next Tuesday. But we don't pay any invoices up front. Nothing will be paid until we receive an invoice and start processing it.
Thank you.
I can jump in now. I'm Marie Randall, everyone. I'm the finance supervisor for the housing division. And it's almost the opposite question of what Jennifer just asked. We do allow invoicing for costs incurred. So everything that Andrew just said is still in place, is still, has to be followed. But if and there's a great example on the slide, so I'll just sort of tee it up that way. If your overall program budget, whatever program it is, is some amount. So in the example, it's 100,000 and our grant is only a part of that. So again, on the slide, the example is $10,000. You can incur and invoice for those costs ahead of, as they happen. So they don't have to be proportional throughout the year. It is something that you can do. It is completely acceptable. But what we want to just make sure you understand is that because what we understand is this, this funding is necessary for this entire program to go on. So none of the or all of the participants in the program would still be counted. It's not just, when you're invoicing us. So all of the reporting requirements are still valid and still need to be followed. But if it's again, instead of this rush at the end of the year, which everybody always, or end of our fiscal year, which everyone always, is dealing with, if you have those costs and they are incurred early and your other funding sources are amenable to that, you can incur and invoice for our costs, as soon as they happen. So if you're done by December with our funds, that's great. You will still have to report, all the beneficiary information and stuff till the end of the fiscal year, but you will not, the invoicing us part will be over. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that's an option. It's up to how you structure your invoicing and your monies or your sources and your your payroll and personnel and all of that stuff. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk about that. Or if you have even further questions, you're more than welcome to email me and we can talk about that further too.
All right. Well, if there aren't any questions about any of the things that myself, Andrew, or Marie just went over, I think this is a good time to get into the demonstration of our Zoom grants reporting and invoicing features. And we've got our partner, Lauren from Zoom Grants, who's going to be doing that demonstration. And so I'm just going to hand it directly over to her so she can get oh, actually, it looks like somebody's got Howard, you had a question.
I do. Actually, I have a few questions. So, can we all get an electronic copy of the slide deck we've been going through?
Yeah, and I think we're recording the meeting too, and we'll send that out afterwards as well.
Okay, great. B, so our organization's principal cost, as represented, in our grant application is paying instructors that are being provided through a contract we have with Arlington Community Learning. So in terms of quote unquote, time slips, demonstrating, how much time those instructors have put in with respect to our program. Do we need the instructors, even though they're not employees, we're just, contracting for them, so they're independent contractors. Do we need those contractors, those instructors to fill out time slips, or can just we do it?
You would need, and Andrew, I'll let you answer the question actually, but I don't think you would need time slips for a contractor.
I agree with Caitlin. If you have just, I think it depends on how you pay your instructors. If you do it with a check, I don't know, whatever you do to pay the contractor, you can demonstrate that form of payment. So if you pay $5,000 to 3 instructors for the first part of the year, show us how you paid that $5,000, if that makes sense.
Well, but don't you want to have some accounting of how much time the instructors have actually put into our program? We're paying them on an hourly basis.
Howard, this is Doug. Maybe I can elaborate. We would get an invoice from Arlington Community Learning, which would stipulate the name of the instructor, the amount of hours he taught, the per hour rate. That I suppose would be sufficient as an invoice to document the cost. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yeah, Doug, that's perfect. The invoice that you get, and then our assumption is that if you all have paid the invoice to the consultant or contractor, you have verified the hours that they have worked. So we don't need to double verify that. We assume that you all have done your due diligence and checking those things, and the invoice that you use to pay serves as your backup documentation for us.
So if in the event that we actually directly contracted with individuals rather than through Arlington Community Learning, we would just submit an invoice for the hours that were submitted to us by the individual. Is that what you're saying, Andrew?
If our money goes directly to that contractor, yes.
No, we would be paying, in either case, we would either be paying Arlington Community Learning and they pay the contractor. That's example A. Or example B, in the unlikely event that we were to hire an individual outside the scheme of using Arlington Community Learning, we would pay those simply by submitting the invoice that they gave us to you, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And so my next question is, I personally don't have any scanning capacity here at home. I can't remember whether Doug does or not. Is submitting a picture in lieu of a scanned document adequate?
If we could read it, yes, that's totally fine.
Okay. And then last, but certainly not least, so again, unless Doug says otherwise, we don't have a contract yet. Is that something I should talk to Caitlin about after we're done?
Which organization are you?
The Alliance for Arlington Senior Programs.
So you're in process. We have your agreement ready, and then we have an internal routing process, so you're in there. So you should be receiving it via DocuSign hopefully this week.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, quick question. Alex Corney, the Fenwick Foundation. This is regarding timesheets and backup. You mentioned putting for your employees the timesheet with the rate and the amount that was paid. Do you then want for backup the complete, if you will, pay stub that includes the entire amount that a person received, even though the Arlington grant portion of it is, let's say, 1/5 of that? Do you require both of those, the timesheet and then the full pay stub showing what that person received in entirety?
Again, we don't want to complicate this work for you all. So I think whatever's easiest. I have found that in previous fiscal years, some of the subrecipients, it's just easier for them to submit one document. And there's, again, I don't know the systems, but if there's a way to, within whatever system you use, to lineate how much was spent per the person on the Arlington side of things, cool. Whatever's easiest for you. If you start to get examples and you have questions on that, please reach out to me and I can go through it with you all. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. I see what you're asking. I don't have like a solid good answer because these are so situational.
No, I guess
Um,
I was just asking if the, let's say if the timesheet sufficed as documentation, or if you
Got it.
needed the pay stub, which was actual proof that the person was paid.
So a timesheet, if you just want to do one dot, again, don't feel like you need to send everything. If
Sure.
a timesheet is clear and it's the timesheet they worked for the Arlington grant, and that timesheet had their hours and the rate, that is plenty. That's totally fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Seeing any other hands? So I think maybe Lauren, let's turn it over to you for the Zoom grants demonstration, and if we can maybe hold questions until the end of Lauren's presentation, and then we can kind of open it back up for if you have any other questions at the end.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry if I sound a little bit like Marge Simpson. I have spent most of this week helping my mom move from Palm Springs, California, up to Oregon. And I don't know if it was screaming on the road in Los Angeles traffic or singing too much in the car, but my voice is a little shot right now. So hope you will bear with me. And let me go ahead and share my screen so I can walk you through how to complete those reports, and as well the demographics and income report, as well as invoices within Zoom Grants. So right now I'm logged in as I Need a Grant, and I'm representing an organization called Senior Assistance League. And this is just a demo program within our Zoom Grants account so that we can show you what it will look like within your own experience as a subrecipient going to submit those invoices and demographics and income reports. You can see over here on the left-hand side is any incomplete applications that you remember you were working on before, and as they went into the submitted folders, they would be here on the left. You should now be able to find that approved awarded application on the right-hand side here within this approved applications folder, and it would be labeled as the FY23 Community Development Fund. There's a couple ways that you can get in and add an invoice very quickly, or add a demographics and income report right here from your homepage. If you don't need to add a new invoice, but maybe want to go back and edit an existing invoice that you've already created, you may just want to go ahead and click into this title to go into that program. So within this portal, you can see that there's a second row of buttons here, which represents the financial and demographics and income report features or modules within Zoom Grants. And to submit an invoice, you'll see that I already created one here. You can create a new invoice here, as well as I said, go back in and edit an existing invoice. And I always recommend that if you have created multiple invoices, for example, that make sure that you are editing the correct one and submitting the correct one that maybe perhaps also has all of your backup documentation uploaded with it as well. If I go into this invoice, you can see that right up at the top, it's going to automatically have all of your information listed here. In order to submit the invoice, once you've completed it, you have a button right here at the top. As was mentioned, you'll want to put in your own invoice number here. I should mention that if for whatever reason you left this blank, Zoom Grants will assign its own invoice number according to the number that's located at the bottom. And in this case, it would be 213277. If, for example, you don't have your own internal invoicing numbering system. You can also fill in the invoice contact name, email, and telephone, noting that sometimes the project contact up here above that's listed or the head applicant isn't necessarily the person who's also completing this particular invoice. You'll need to be sure for any budget line item that you have listed that you provide a description, the amount that's requested, the quantity and rate. And down below, you'll also want to be sure that you also upload any requested documentation. Anything that is marked as required means that Zoom Grants will require you to upload some sort of document here before you're allowed to submit this invoice. Make sure that it is indeed the correct document that you need to upload, because we won't check and make sure that it's not a picture of your dog or cat. It needs to be the correct document, as it will be determined by the administrator. Once you've completed all of your information, uploaded all of your correct documentation, you can click the Submit Invoice button, and it will then be sent to the administrator for their review. You also have here the demographics and income report. And these are set up. Each one is due, the first one will be due on the 17th, 16th, 17th, and 30th here of those respective months. With each one of these questions that's listed, you'll want to be sure to answer each and every one. Down here at the very bottom, you'll also see documents that have been requested, have not been requested for this demographics and income report. But previously, you'll see that the program evaluation or this demographics and income report used to have the program evaluation form. This table was previously embedded below the demographic and income report in FY22 down here at the bottom. But just so you're aware, this has now been moved back to its separate tab in FY 2023. So if you were looking for that program evaluation form to complete that here at the bottom of this report, just beware that it will be up here in the program evaluation tab up above and needs to be completed. This will include any of the performance measures that you need to create below. Any of these are editable. You need to provide an estimate for the expected number of people households for each indicator. I also wanted to mention that the documents requested that are added to the invoice, these are required when submitting invoices. As I said, you need to make sure that you have some sort of backup documentation with each one of your invoices before you submit that invoice. This demographic and income report totals, if you're looking at this tab here and wondering, what do I do here? What do I need to complete here? This is actually a tab that is completely generated by Zoom Grants, and you don't need to worry about completing this tab. It's basically an accumulation of all of the report 1, report 2, or report 3. It will tally and add up all of your reported race and ethnicity information over time to provide these totals by report, but also a cumulative total over time. But just so you're aware, there's nothing that you need to enter here. This is something that Zoom Grants does for you. There's a couple other things I want to go over really quickly, which is how to log into Zoom Grants. Accessing your Zoom Grants account is easy. Just make sure that when you log in that you go to https://www.zoomgrants.com/login. If you can't remember your password for any reason, you can use the forgot password link, or if you need to contact questions@zoomgrants.com, they're there to help with any kind of questions you may have about accessing your account, or if you're having trouble uploading a document or anything like that. I want to also go over the process of how to add collaborators to your application. This is one of the most common mistakes that we see by administrators. And it's important that if you have others who are working on your application other than just a head applicant, which is commonly the case, usually there's more than one person working on an application, and maybe on different parts of that application. You may have one collaborator that's working on just the reporting elements or working on those demographic and income reports. So when you set up the collaborator access, I want to go over how you can do that very easily. Under your cover sheet of your application, you can go back at any time and update the collaborator access. You simply provide an email address, first name, last name, title for that person, and then be sure to give that person the editing access that they need. If it was just for the application, when they were working on the application, you may at this point need to also give them access to edit and submit demographics and income report or financial reports as well. You can also go into Zoom Grants University. If you have any questions, you can access that by clicking the help button in the upper right-hand corner, which gives you some other quick and easy ways to go to Zoom Grants University, as well as contact the administrator if you have program-related questions. If you have technical issues or any kinds of questions like that, you can also ask Zoom Grants, which will send us an email or As I said, you can also access help within the system itself. Search for an answer or go to the respective college within Zoom Grants University for applicants. Does anyone have any questions, or is there anything else that I can cover?
Jump in and just expand on a couple things that you had already mentioned, Lauren, if you don't mind. And that was the first, if you could go back to the invoice, pull up an invoice example. And I just wanted to point out to people that when you're filling out each line, the requested amount for each line item, you're going to be required to enter both the quantity and the rate funding for that line item. And that what it's going to do is it's going to automatically calculate the requested amount. And so the reason that we do this is because, as Andrew was saying before, it's really helpful for us to see what the hourly rate is that you're going to be requesting for each of the staff personnel that you're requesting reimbursement for. And so this gives us an opportunity to cross-check this number with the backup documentation that you're submitting for. So what you would do for each personnel is you would add the number of hours and the hourly rate for those staff people to get the total requested amount. If you're requesting reimbursement for things like, operating expenses or travel, you would do the quantity would be 1 and the rate would be the requested amount, so that it would equal out to the total requested amount for that particular line item. So I just wanted to flag that because that's something that we started for fiscal year 2022, and we are going to carry that over into 2023. So just be aware when you're submitting your invoices that that is how you'll be filling out this table.
Could you say the example again?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Could you say the travel example again? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, so for travel, if you're going to be requesting reimbursement for travel, you would put a quantity of 1 and then the total requested amount under the rate funding. So, okay. And that would be for anything aside from personnel. That's how you would do that. And so the other thing that I wanted to point out is, Lauren, is if you could go back to the report, demographics and income report tab really quickly. So when you're filling out this report, something to keep in mind, and this goes back to remembering what funding source your program is funded by, you need to select that option in this first question, and that's going to pull up the types of reporting requirements that you're going to be required to submit to us quarterly. So if you're CDBG funded, you would select my program is CDBG funded. If you're AHIF funded, you would select AHIF funded, CSBG, and then so on. So again, this information is included in your grant agreement. It's also in your budget and program evaluation forms that you worked on with either me or Rolda. So if you are confused and not sure which source your program is funded under, you can either check there or you can email us and we can let you know that. That's all I wanted to point out.
Any other questions I can help address? Well, the questions usually come later, so if you have questions, you can check out Zoom Grants University if you're one of those self-learner types and want to just read a little bit more. You can also contact us if you're having any kind of technical issues or just need a little technical assistance. We're happy to help, standing by.
And how do we contact you?
As I said, you can click here where it says Ask Zoom Grants, and it will open up your email client to go to questions@zoomgrants.com, or you can just email us at questions@zoomgrants.com.
Sure. Thank you.
You bet. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thanks so much for having me and for dealing with this raspy voice this morning.
Thanks, Lauren. It looks like, oh, I thought I saw someone had their hand raised. And then I think there was a question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Barbara, go for it.
Yes, I was just wondering in the demographics and income report, whether you enter zeros if there's, when you're going through, do you need to enter zeros or can you leave blanks where there's no quantity?
For completion of the report, it would be good for you to enter zeros.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's a performance indicator, or if you didn't serve anyone in a particular quarter, then yeah, just enter zeros, and still submit the report because if you don't, then we will be following up with you to see what's going on there.
One other thing that I'd like to add, please. So in doing your quarterly reports, if you have new participants during a quarter or from one quarter to the next, that's what you would add for your subsequent quarterly reports. And that is very important because then the final demographics numbers, they would reflect that. What I'm saying is cumulatively at the end of the year, it will reflect the total number of applicants or clients that you've served, and that would have duplicated numbers. So it's important to add the change. In other words, if you had additional new clients during those years, that's what you add as you go along for each quarter. So you're not repeating or duplicating your numbers.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you should be counting your unduplicated clients each quarter.
Can I ask a
go.
follow-up question to that, Rhoda?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Normally, our performance measures have to be the same as our demographic numbers. In this year, we had a lot more demographics but they wouldn't match up to our performance measures because we weren't able to provide them what we needed. Can we have more demographic numbers than our performance numbers?
Yes. Yes. In other words, you may have, certain number of clients who, there isn't a direct match between the performance and the clients, but it is a direct match between your total number of clients served and your demographics data. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just point out that to kind of expand off of that, Stephanie, at the end of the year, when we're entering our data into either the CSBG system or the HUD system, we need to make sure that the demographics information that you're submitting matches the income information, the number of people that you're serving in each of those categories. So as long as at the end of the year those two numbers match, it's fine. But if it doesn't, if it's kind of in fluctuation throughout the year, then as long as there's an explanation, that it's typically fine. It looks like Stephanie Bass, you had a question as well.
Hi, yes, I put a question in the chat. Thank you, Rhoda, for answering that we should, if we need to make changes to outcome measures, we should do that at the beginning of the year versus mid-year. Can we have any instruction on how to do that?
So you would let us know, your program monitor, which is myself or Caitlin, and we would either ask Zena to make the necessary changes on the performance evaluation chart in Zoom Grants.
Okay, so just be in touch with you directly.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's the same for budget changes as well, everyone. Submit your budget changes to the project manager and we would take it from there and advise you further in terms of the changes, being able to make the changes in Zoom Grants or whether we would do it from our end.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Stephanie, do you have another one?
Sorry, I was just trying to take my hand down.
Oh, okay. No worries. All right. So yeah, here's some important dates to remember for, as we start the new fiscal year. So it's going to begin on July 1st. And then first quarter reports are due on October 15th, which is the 15 days after the end of the first quarter. Second quarter reports are due on January 16th. Third quarter reports are due on April 17th, 2023. And then just as Andrew was mentioning before, final invoices are typically due before the final reports. So final invoices for 2023 will be due on June 15th, 2023, and then final reports are due on June 30th. So yeah, isn't any other questions? I think I'll turn it back over to Jennifer and she'll kind of wrap us up for today.
Hi, I didn't actually have any wrap up. Thank you all for coming. Again, I mean, this stuff, if you're new to it, it's actually easier than it sounds. So once you start working in Zoom grants and figuring out the invoicing, it will hopefully be easier. But again, we're all here to help you. And Lauren from Zoom Grants, thank you so much for coming. Zoom Grants is actually really helpful if you have sort of technical questions. They've been really good about helping people to figure that out. So we just want to encourage you, reach out if you need help, and congratulations on your grant. We're excited to work with you. And with that, I guess we will let you go back to your day. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.